I never thought the worst day of my life would start with such beautiful weather. The sun was streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows, lighting up the expensive downtown apartment that I'd been paying for since we moved in 4 years ago. I was sitting on our cream-coloured couch, the one I'd bought on sale because Brandon said we needed furniture that looked successful for when investors visited. Those investors never came, by the way, but I kept making the payments anyway. I heard his key in the lock around 2 in the afternoon. That was strange. Brandon usually didn't come home until after 7 these days, always with some excuse about meetings or networking dinners or putting out fires at the office. His company, his success. Funny how all those words were his now, even though my bank account told a very different story. The door opened and he walked in wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. His hair was styled perfectly, his shoes were polished, and he had that look on his face, the one I'd been seeing more and more lately. Cold, distant, like he was looking at a stranger instead of the woman who'd kept him fed and housed for 6 years. He didn't say hello, didn't ask about my day. He just reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out a manila envelope. My stomach dropped before my brain even understood why. He walked over to where I was sitting and tossed the envelope onto the coffee table. It landed with a slap that seemed way too loud in the quiet apartment. Some papers slid halfway out. I could see official-looking letterhead. Legal words. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Divorce papers, he said flatly, like he was telling me what he wanted for dinner. My lawyer already filled everything out. You just need to sign. I stared at the papers, then up at him. My hands started shaking. Brandon. What? Don't make this dramatic, Amelia. He said my name like it tasted bad in his mouth. We both know this hasn't been working for a while now. We both know. My voice came out small and confused. You never said anything. We never talked about... That's the problem. He cut me off, shoving his hands in his pockets. You don't get it. You never got it. I've moved beyond this phase of my life. Beyond... this. He gestured vaguely at me, at the apartment, at everything we'd built together. Except he hadn't built it. I had. While he was busy dreaming, I was busy paying. I picked up the papers with trembling fingers. The words blurred together. Irreconcilable differences. Separate assets, no spousal support requested by either party. That last part made me look up sharply. No spousal support? Brandon, I've been paying for everything for 6 years. Your rent, your food, your car insurance, Those were gifts, he said simply. His voice was so calm it scared me. You offered to help. You wanted to support my dreams. That's what partners do, right? Well, now I don't need that kind of support anymore. I've made it, Amelia. On my own. On his own. The words hit me like a physical slap. I have an investor meeting at 4, he continued, checking his expensive watch. The one I'd bought him for his birthday last year because he said he needed to look professional. So, if you could just sign these, we can both move forward with our lives. Move forward, I repeated. My brain felt like it was moving through mud. Brandon, we've been married for 5 years, together for 6. You can't just... You were just a temporary stepping stone. The words came out so casually, like he was commenting on the weather, like he hadn't just reduced 6 years of my life to a sentence that made me sound like nothing, less than nothing, a thing he'd used and was now discarding. I've outgrown you, he continued. And now there was something almost pitying in his voice, which somehow made it worse. You're still working your little design job, living your small life, thinking small. I'm networking with people who matter now. I'm building something real. And honestly, you'd just hold me back. I should have cried. That's what the old Amelia would have done. The Amelia from 6 years ago who fell in love with a charming man and his big dreams. The Amelia who believed in him when nobody else did. The Amelia who worked 50-hour weeks and skipped lunches and maxed out her credit cards because she thought she was investing in their future. But I didn't cry. Instead, something strange happened. I felt my lips curve up into a smile, It started small and then grew wider. Not a sad smile, not a bitter smile, just knowing. Brandon noticed. His confident expression flickered for just a second. "What's funny?" "Nothing," I said softly, still smiling as I set the papers back down on the table. "Nothing at all." "Then sign them." His voice had an edge now. "I don't have time for games." "I'll need to read through everything first," I said, keeping my voice steady and calm. "Have my own lawyer look at it. You understand, right? It's a big decision." His jaw tightened. "There's nothing to look at. It's straightforward. We split our individual assets and go our separate ways." "Our individual assets," I repeated, tasting the words. "Right. Of course." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to figure out why I was being so calm, why I wasn't begging or crying or asking him to reconsider. The smile on my face seemed to unnerve him, but he was too arrogant to ask about it directly. "Fine," he finally said. "Read it. Have a lawyer look at it. Whatever makes you feel better." But this is happening, Amelia. I've already moved on. Literally. I'm moving into a penthouse downtown next week. The company can afford it now. The company. His company. The one that wouldn't exist without my money, my support, my belief in him when he had nothing and was nothing. "That's wonderful," I said, and I meant it. Not because I was happy for him, but because he'd just made everything so much easier. "I'm glad things worked out for you." He looked confused by my reaction, like I wasn't following the script he'd written in his head. He'd expected tears, anger, maybe even pleading, but not this calm acceptance, not this strange little smile that I couldn't quite wipe off my face. "I have to go," he said abruptly, backing toward the door. "Just sign the papers. My lawyer will be in touch." He left without saying goodbye. The door clicked shut behind him and I sat there in the beautiful afternoon light, divorce papers spread out on the coffee table in front of me, still smiling that small, knowing smile. Then I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened my laptop, the same laptop I'd used to pay all his bills for 6 years, and clicked on a folder buried deep in my files. A folder I'd been building almost unconsciously since the day we moved in together, since the first time he forgot to pay me back, since the first time he promised something would be different and it never was. The folder was labelled simply, Records. Inside were 6 years of bank statements, receipts, loan agreements, text messages, emails, photos, documentation of every single dollar I'd spent on him, every promise he'd made, every lie he'd told. I'd told myself for years that I was just being organised, that I was just keeping track for tax purposes or budgeting or some other practical reason. But deep down, in a place I didn't want to admit existed, I think I always knew this day might come. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in 2 months. Cass Williams, my best friend since college, the woman who'd warned me about Brandon from the beginning, the divorce lawyer who'd told me 100 times that if I ever needed her, she'd be there. I pressed call and waited. She answered on the second ring. "Amelia? Everything okay?" "Hey, Cass," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Remember how you said if I ever needed a good lawyer, you'd help me?" "Of course. Always. What's going on?" I looked down at the divorce papers on my table, then back at my laptop screen filled with 6 years of evidence. "I think," I said slowly, that knowing smile spreading across my face again. "It's finally time to collect on some old debts." 6 years earlier, I was a completely different person. I actually believed in fairy tales. I met Brandon on a Tuesday afternoon at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. I'd just gotten promoted to senior designer at my firm and was feeling pretty good about life. I had my laptop open working on a client project when I heard someone cursing loudly at the table next to mine. "This is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. These people have no vision, none." I glanced over. He was maybe 30 years old, decent-looking, wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt. His laptop screen showed what looked like a business presentation, and he was scrolling through emails with increasing frustration. Investor problems? I asked before I could stop myself. He looked up, surprised that someone had spoken to him. Then he smiled. And it was the kind of smile that made you want to trust him. Warm. A little self-deprecating. Is it that obvious? Only to everyone in a 3-table radius, I said, smiling back. That's how it started. He bought me a coffee. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his brilliant idea for a productivity app that would revolutionize how people work. He had passion, vision, and absolutely no money. Every investor he'd pitched had turned him down. He was living in a cramped studio apartment, eating ramen, barely getting by. I found it charming. Here was someone who believed in something so much that he was willing to struggle for it. In a world full of people playing it safe, Brandon Mitchell was chasing his dream. We started dating 3 weeks later. The first red flag came at month 2. We were at dinner, a cheap place because he was conserving capital for the business. And when the check came, he patted his pockets and made a face. Oh man, I left my wallet at home. Can you grab this? I'll pay you back tomorrow. I paid. He didn't pay me back tomorrow. Or the next day. When I mentioned it a week later, he looked confused. I thought we were past keeping score like that. I mean, we're together now, right? At month 3, he suggested we move in together. Think about it, he said, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. We're spending every night together anyway. And if we split an apartment, we'd both save money. I could put what I save into the business, really make some progress. I should have asked more questions, like why we'd be moving into my apartment, which meant I'd still be paying the same rent I always had. Or why splitting expenses somehow meant I paid for groceries, utilities, and internet while he focused on the company. But I didn't ask those questions. I was in love, and love makes you stupid. By month 6, I was paying for everything. And I mean everything. Rent, obviously, food, his car insurance because transportation is essential for networking meetings, his gym membership because appearance matters in business, his new laptop because the old one was too slow for the software he needed. Every time he had an explanation that made sense in the moment, every time he promised he'd pay me back once his deal closed, or his investment came through, or his client paid. Those things never happened. Year 1 was hard. I was working constantly, picking up freelance projects on top of my regular job, just to cover our expenses. Brandon was home most days, supposedly working on his business. What that actually meant was him sitting on our couch in his pajamas until 2 in the afternoon, then spending 3 hours at coffee shops networking with people who were just as broke and unsuccessful as he was. I'd come home exhausted from a 10-hour day to find him playing video games. How was your day? I'd ask, setting down bags of groceries I'd bought with money from my paycheck. Intense, he'd say, not looking away from the screen. Had 2 investor calls. Really promising conversations. I think we're close to something big. We were never close to something big. Year 2 was when I started keeping records. Not on purpose, really. I was just trying to organize our finances, figure out where all my money was going. I made a spreadsheet, listed out every bill I paid, every loan I gave him, every expense that was supposed to be temporary. The numbers were staggering. Rent for 24 months, groceries, insurance. That time his car broke down and needed $1,500 in repairs. The time he needed $3,000 for a business development course that would open doors. The time he needed $5,000 for critical software licenses. I was looking at over $60,000 in just 2 years. Money I'd given him. Money he'd promised to pay back. Money that had vanished into his business that still didn't exist as anything more than a fancy website and some business cards. That's when Cass came to visit. She took one look around our apartment, at Brandon asleep on the couch at 11 a.m. on a Thursday, at me getting ready to go to my second job that week, and she pulled me into the kitchen. "Girl, what are you doing?" she whispered urgently. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. You're working yourself to death while he plays startup CEO in his pajamas." When was the last time he contributed anything? Financially? Actually? He's building something, I said defensively. These things take time. You don't understand how hard it is to launch a company. You're right, I don't understand. Because I've never seen anyone launch a company by sleeping until noon and playing Xbox. Cass grabbed my shoulders. Amelia, listen to me. You're not his girlfriend. You're his bank. And he's making withdrawals with no intention of ever making deposits. That's not fair. He loves me. He's just going through a hard time. A hard time? Cass's voice went up. Amelia, you're going through a hard time. You're exhausted. You've lost weight. You're working 2 jobs to support a grown man who won't even thank you. When was the last time he took you on a date? Bought you flowers? Did anything that didn't benefit him? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't remember. Cass sighed and hugged me. I love you. You're my best friend. And I'm watching him drain you dry. Just promise me you'll protect yourself, okay? Keep records. Documentation. Just in case. In case of what? In case you wake up one day and realize I'm right. I promised her I would, just to make her feel better. But deep down, I still believed in Brandon. I still believed we were building something together. Year 3 was when things started to shift. Brandon actually got a real investor. Not someone from a coffee shop or a networking event, but an actual venture capital firm that gave him $200,000. I cried when he told me. Finally, all the struggle was paying off. Finally, he could pay me back. Finally, we could be actual partners instead of me just being his support system. The night he got the money, I made his favorite dinner. I put on a nice dress. I even bought a bottle of champagne with money I didn't really have. He came home at midnight, drunk. He'd been out celebrating with his new investors and business partners. Where were you? I asked quietly. I made dinner. I wanted to celebrate with you. He looked at me like I'd said something crazy. It was a business dinner, Amelia. I couldn't bring you to that. You wouldn't understand the technical stuff we were discussing. It would have been awkward. That was the first time I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, just crack. Brandon, I said carefully, now that you have investor money, maybe we could talk about you paying back some of the loans I gave you. I have credit card debt from... Are you serious right now? He actually looked angry. I just got the biggest break of my life and you want to talk about money? This is exactly why I didn't invite you tonight. You don't think like an entrepreneur. You think small. He went to bed, left me sitting at the table with cold pasta and warm champagne. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop and added to my records folder. $200,000 in new funding. None of it coming back to me. I was beginning to understand what Cass had meant about protecting myself. Year 4 was when Brandon's company actually started making money. Real money. The app finally launched after 3 years of development, and people actually downloaded it. Thousands of users became tens of thousands, then 50,000, then 200,000. His company went from a fantasy to a real business almost overnight. I watched it happen from the outside. He stopped telling me about his day, stopped asking for my opinion, stopped acknowledging that I'd been there since the beginning, since before the beginning, when he was just a guy with a laptop and a dream and absolutely nothing else. We got featured in Tech Tomorrow magazine, he announced one evening, tossing the publication on our kitchen counter. Our kitchen counter in the apartment I still paid for entirely by myself. I picked it up and read the article. There was a full-page spread about Brandon Mitchell, the self-made entrepreneur who bootstrapped his way to success. The interview talked about his vision, his sacrifice, his determination to succeed against all odds. Against all odds, I read aloud. That's interesting phrasing. What do you mean? He was scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention. It says here you were self-funded, that you used your own savings to build the company. Yeah, so. Brandon, you didn't have savings. I was paying your rent, your food, everything. He finally looked up from his phone and his expression was cold. Are you really going to do this? Ruin this moment for me by bringing up the past? The past? This present. I'm still paying for this apartment. Then stop, he said simply. I never asked you to. That was a lie. He'd asked me 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways, but he said it so confidently that for a moment, I almost doubted my own memory. That's what he was good at, making you question yourself. I didn't argue. Instead, I went to my laptop and added the magazine article to my records folder. Screenshot after screenshot of him claiming to be self-made, self-funded, completely independent. The lies were piling up, and I was documenting every single one. By month 6 of year 4, Brandon started coming home less and less. Business dinners, he said, networking events, important meetings with potential partners. He'd leave at 8 a.m. in his expensive suits, paid for with company money, and come home after I was asleep. The apartment started feeling like a hotel where we were both guests who happened to share a room. Then the criticism started. You know, you should really update your wardrobe, he said one morning while I was getting ready for work. That style is kind of basic. I looked down at my clothes. Professional, clean, appropriate for my job. What's wrong with what I wear? Nothing, if you're working at a regular company. But if you're going to come to my events, you need to look the part. My associates have a certain standard. Your events, I repeated. Brandon, you haven't invited me to anything work-related in over a year. Because you'd be uncomfortable, he said, like he was doing me a favor. You don't know these people. You don't understand that world. What he meant was, you're not good enough for my new life. I started noticing other things. Charges on his credit card, the one linked to the company, for restaurants I'd never been to, expensive ones, hotels in the city, even though we lived right downtown. When I asked about them, he had explanations ready. Client dinners. Sometimes they run late and it's easier to grab a hotel room than drive home tired. Logical. Reasonable. Completely believable if you wanted to believe it. But I was past wanting to believe. I started paying more attention. His social media showed photos from company events, networking parties, tech conferences. In the background of many photos was the same woman. Young, beautiful, always dressed perfectly, always standing close to Brandon. I clicked on her profile. Veronica Lane, social media influencer, 30,000 followers. Every photo was carefully staged. Perfectly lit, she looked expensive. She looked like everything I wasn't. She'd tagged Brandon's company in dozens of posts. Amazing event with innovative entrepreneurs. Love supporting visionary leaders. Great conversation about the future of tech. I scrolled back through the posts. She'd been appearing in photos with him for 6 months. When Brandon came home that night at 11 p.m. smelling like perfume that wasn't mine, I was sitting on the couch with my laptop. Who's Veronica Lane? I asked calmly. He froze for just a second. Then his face arranged itself into confused innocence. Who? Veronica. She's in a lot of photos from your events. You seem close. Oh, her. He laughed, but it sounded forced. She's just an influencer who covers tech stuff. She comes to all the industry events. Why? Just curious. You've never mentioned her. Because there's nothing to mention. His voice had an edge now. Amelia, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're being paranoid, jealous. It's not attractive, and honestly, it's why you can't fit into my world. Everyone there is professional, friendly, networking. And you're here looking for problems that don't exist. He turned it around on me. Made me the problem. Made my reasonable question into evidence of my own insecurity. That's what finally broke through the last of my denial. Not the evidence of cheating. I didn't have proof yet. But the way he spoke to me. Like I was stupid. Like I was crazy for noticing obvious things. I wasn't stupid. And I wasn't crazy. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent 8 hours going through everything. Bank statements going back 6 years. Credit card records, business filings, tax returns, social media posts, news articles, every interview he'd given, every claim he'd made about being self-made and independent. I cross-referenced dates. That expensive jewelry purchase last month? Same day, Veronica posted a photo of a new necklace. That hotel charge? Same night, there was no business event on his calendar, just a gap in his schedule. I found loan applications where he'd sworn under penalty of perjury that he had no outstanding debts. He'd signed documents claiming he was financially independent when he couldn't even pay for his own lunch. I found investor documents where he claimed to be the sole founder and funder of his company. No mention of anyone else's contributions. I organized everything into folders. Financial fraud, loan documentation, false statements, infidelity evidence. I made backups, cloud storage, external hard drive, USB drives hidden in 3 different locations. Then I did something I'd been avoiding for 4 years. I calculated exactly how much money I'd given him. Not estimated. Calculated. Every dollar, every cent, with receipts and bank records to prove it. The number was $178,342. $178,342. That's how much supporting Brandon's dream had cost me. That's how much the self-made entrepreneur had taken from me while telling the world he did it alone. I sat there staring at that number for a long time. Then I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Cass. "You were right," I told her, "about everything, and I need your help." The second was to a private investigator whose name Cass gave me. "I need surveillance," I said, "and I need it documented in a way that will hold up in court." I wasn't being paranoid. I wasn't being jealous. I was being smart. Finally, Brandon wanted to erase me from his success story? Fine. But he was going to pay for every word of that fiction. The private investigator's name was Gerald Chen. He was 60 years old, former police detective, and according to Cass, he was thorough and discreet. We met at a diner across town where nobody knew me. "What exactly are we documenting?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. "My husband is having an affair. I need proof. Photos, videos, dates, locations. Everything that would hold up in court." Gerald nodded, writing. "How long has this been going on?" "I'm not sure. At least 6 months, maybe longer. Her name is Veronica Lane." I showed him her social media profile. He studied it for a moment. "Social media influencer. These cases are usually pretty straightforward. They document everything themselves." He looked up at me. "But I'm guessing you need more than social media posts." "I need evidence that can't be denied or explained away. My husband is very good at explanations." "They usually are," Gerald said quietly. "Give me 2 weeks." While Gerald worked, I met with Cass at her law office. She'd been reviewing the documents I'd compiled, and when I walked in, her desk was covered with papers. "Amelia, sit down," she said, her voice serious. I sat. "I've been practicing family law for 12 years. I've seen a lot of financial situations in divorces, but this..." She gestured at the papers. "This is beyond typical marital financial disputes. What your husband has done could be prosecuted as fraud." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" Cass pulled out a document. "These loan applications where he claimed no outstanding debts while owing you over $170,000? That's loan fraud. These investor documents where he claimed to be self-funded. Securities fraud. These tax returns where he significantly underreported your financial contributions. Tax fraud." "I just wanted to document everything for the divorce," I said slowly. "I know. But Amelia, this goes way beyond a divorce. He didn't just lie to you. He lied to banks, investors, and the IRS. And you have documentation for all of it." She leaned forward. "The question is, how far do you want to take this?" I thought about Brandon throwing divorce papers at me, calling me a temporary stepping stone, erasing 6 years of my life like they meant nothing. "As far as it needs to go," I said. Cass smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who'd just been given permission to destroy someone who deserved it. "Then let's build an airtight case, not just for divorce court, for everything." We spent the next week preparing. Cass brought in a forensic accountant who went through everything with professional precision. Every transaction was verified, categorized, documented. Every loan agreement, even the casual ones Brandon had signed without thinking, probably assuming they'd never matter, was authenticated. He was careless, the accountant told us. He signed things without reading them, left paper trails everywhere, probably because he never thought anyone would actually look. That was Brandon's fatal flaw. He'd underestimated me for so long that he'd stopped being careful. At home, I maintained the performance of normalcy. I cooked dinner on the rare nights Brandon came home. I smiled. I didn't ask questions about where he'd been or who he'd been with. I acted like everything was fine. It was the hardest acting I'd ever done. "You're in a good mood lately," Brandon commented one evening, suspicious. "I'm just trying to be more positive," I said lightly. "You're right. I was too focused on the past. I'm trying to move forward." He seemed satisfied with that answer. Relieved, even. It meant I was accepting my role as the woman he was leaving behind. The woman who'd served her purpose and would now fade away quietly. He had no idea I was gathering evidence that would dismantle everything he'd built on my foundation. 2 weeks later, Gerald called. "I have what you need. It's extensive." We met at his office. He handed me a USB drive and a thick folder of printed photos. The first photo showed Brandon and Veronica at an expensive restaurant, holding hands across the table. The next showed them entering a hotel together at 9 p.m. The next showed them leaving the same hotel at 7 a.m. "There are 36 separate documented meetings over the past 6 weeks," Gerald said. "Restaurants, hotels, her apartment. I have video from several encounters. They're not being discreet." I looked through the photos with a strange sense of detachment. I'd known this was happening, but seeing it confirmed was different. Final. "There's something else," Gerald said carefully. "I did some background work on Miss Lane. She has a pattern. She targets successful men, gets involved with them, and then..." He pulled out another document. 3 previous relationships with wealthy entrepreneurs, all married. She has a skill for being in the right place when relationships are already unstable. "She's a professional," I said quietly. "Essentially, yes." I added Gerald's USB drive to my collection. The evidence was overwhelming now. Financial fraud, loan documentation, infidelity, false statements under oath, tax evasion, all of it documented, verified, and ready for court. Then I did something that surprised even me. I bought security cameras for our apartment. Small ones, the kind you could hide. I positioned them in the living room and kitchen, common areas where there was no expectation of privacy. "Why?" Cass asked when I told her. "Because I want to document his real life, not the one he shows investors and reporters. The truth." For 3 weeks, those cameras recorded everything. Brandon playing video games for hours while I was at work. Brandon ordering expensive food delivery charged to my credit card. Still, even now with all his money, he used my card out of habit. Brandon practicing his pitch in the mirror, talking about his journey, his sacrifices, his self-made success. But the most damning recordings were audio. Brandon on phone calls with his friends, speaking freely because he thought I wasn't home. "She's still paying the rent, can you believe it?" Laughter. "I keep meaning to start covering it, but why would I?" "She hasn't asked me to stop." Another call. "Once the IPO happens, I'm gone. Moving to the penthouse, probably marrying Veronica. Amelia served her purpose. She's like training wheels, necessary at the start, but you take them off once you learn to ride." Another. "She'll never leave on her own. She's too invested. Women like her, they think if they just love you enough, support you enough, eventually you'll appreciate it. It's kind of pathetic, honestly." I sat in my car listening to those recordings through earbuds, parked outside our apartment building. My hands were steady. I wasn't crying. I was just done. Done pretending. Done hoping. Done being the person Brandon Mitchell had used and discarded. That evening, I copied everything onto a new USB drive. financial documents, loan agreements, photos of infidelity, video footage, audio recordings, tax records, investor fraud, all of it organized in clearly labeled folders. I labeled the drive simply Evidence, Torres v. Mitchell. Then I sat down and wrote Brandon an email. Not to send, just to write, to put into words what I was feeling. You called me a stepping stone, but stepping stones don't feel pain, they don't sacrifice, they don't love. I was never a stone in your path, Brandon. I was the ground you built on, and you're about to learn what happens when you dig up your own foundation. I deleted the email without sending it. He'd understand soon enough. 3 days later, Brandon came home with the divorce papers, and I smiled that quiet, knowing smile, because everything was ready. The courthouse was smaller than I expected. I'd imagined something grand and imposing, but it was just a regular building with fluorescent lights and tired-looking carpet. Cass and I arrived 30 minutes early. She was carrying 2 briefcases full of evidence. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. I'd been ready for weeks. Brandon arrived 15 minutes later with his lawyer, a sharp-looking man in an expensive suit named Richard Thompson. And behind them, like she had every right to be there, was Veronica. She was dressed like she was attending a fashion show, not a divorce hearing. Designer clothes, perfect makeup, confident smile. She actually waved at me. I didn't wave back. I just watched Brandon's face as he noticed me sitting calmly with Cass. He'd expected me to look defeated, broken. Instead, I'd worn my best suit and I'd gotten a haircut the day before. I looked professional, put together, ready. Something flickered in his expression, uncertainty maybe. But then Richard leaned over and whispered something to him, and Brandon's confidence returned. He thought he'd already won. We were called into the courtroom. Judge Patricia Reeves presided, a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd heard every lie twice. She looked over both parties as we took our seats. "This is a hearing for the dissolution of marriage between Brandon Mitchell and Amelia Torres Mitchell," she said. "Mr. Thompson, you filed first. Please present your case." Richard stood smoothly. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward, no-fault divorce. My client and Mrs. Mitchell have grown apart. They have no children, no shared assets. Mr. Mitchell is requesting a clean separation where each party retains their individual property and accounts. No shared assets." Judge Reeves looked at her papers. "They were married for 5 years. Yes, Your Honor. But Mr. Mitchell built his company independently. Mrs. Mitchell has her own career and income. They maintained largely separate finances." Judge Reeves looked at me. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you contest this characterization?" Cass stood. "We absolutely contest it, Your Honor. And we have extensive documentation to prove that Mr. Mitchell's entire business was built on fraudulent claims and my client's financial support." Brandon's lawyer smiled condescendingly. "Your Honor, it's common in divorces for one party to claim they contributed more than they did. Mrs. Mitchell may have provided some emotional support, but $178,342, Cass interrupted. "That's not emotional support. That's documented financial investment over 6 years." Richard's smile faltered slightly. "Your Honor, these were gifts between married partners." "They were loans," Cass said firmly, "with signed agreements. We have documentation of every transaction, including Mr. Mitchell's written promises to repay." She opened her first briefcase and began presenting documents. Bank statements showing my payments for rent, utilities, insurance, groceries, everything. Loan agreements that Brandon had signed casually over the years, probably never imagining they'd matter. Text messages where he promised to pay me back once the money came through. Brandon shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Richard was flipping through copies of the documents, his confident expression cracking. "Furthermore," Cass continued, "Mr. Mitchell represented himself to investors as self-funded. He claimed on official documents that he had no outstanding debts. He told reporters he was a self-made entrepreneur who bootstrapped his company with his own savings. She presented the magazine articles, the investor documents, the loan applications. "These are material misrepresentations," Cass said. "Mr. Mitchell committed fraud to obtain investment capital and business loans, all while owing my client nearly $200,000 that he had no intention of repaying." Judge Reeves was leaning forward now, studying the documents with increasing interest. "Mr. Thompson, did your client disclose any of this?" Richard looked at Brandon, who had gone pale. "Your Honor, my client assured me there were no outstanding debts." "Because your client is a liar," Cass said flatly, "and we can prove it." She presented the tax returns showing how Brandon had underreported my contributions, the social media posts where he claimed to be self-made, the interviews where he erased my existence from his success story. Brandon finally spoke up, his voice tight. "Those were gifts. She offered to help. She wanted to support my dreams. That's what partners do." "Is it what partners do to commit perjury?" Cass asked. She pulled out more documents. "These are sworn statements you made to banks. Under penalty of perjury, you claimed no outstanding debts, no financial obligations. Were those statements true or false?" Brandon's jaw clenched. "The situation was complicated. True or false, Mr. Mitchell?" They were contextually." "Your Honor," Richard interrupted desperately, "this is turning into a criminal investigation, not a divorce hearing." "Because your client committed crimes," Cass said. "But we're not here to prosecute those today. We're here to ensure my client receives what she's legally owed." Judge Reeves held up her hand. "Let's take a step back. Mrs. Williams, what is your client seeking?" "Full repayment of all documented loans with interest, 40% equity in Mr. Mitchell's company as compensation for her undisclosed founding contributions, and full legal fees." Brandon shot to his feet. 40%? Are you insane? That company is mine." "Sit down, Mr. Mitchell," Judge Reeves said sharply. He sat, but his face was red with anger. "Your Honor," Richard tried, "even if some financial support occurred, 40% equity is excessive." "Let me see all the documentation," Judge Reeves said. "Everything." Cass handed over the organized folders. The judge spent 10 minutes reading through them in silence. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear Veronica shifting uncomfortably in her seat behind Brandon. Finally, Judge Reeves looked up. Her expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Williams, you mentioned additional evidence?" Cass nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. My client has one more piece of evidence that contextualizes Mr. Mitchell's character and intentions." She looked at me. This was the moment. I stood and walked to the judge's bench. My hands weren't shaking. I felt completely calm. I placed the USB drive on the desk in front of Judge Reeves. "What is this?" she asked. "Security footage from our apartment," I said quietly. "And audio recordings from conversations Mr. Mitchell had while I wasn't home, or when he thought I wasn't listening." Brandon went white. "You recorded me? That's illegal." "It's video from common areas of her own home," Cass said. "Completely legal. And audio from phone conversations where Mr. Mitchell had no reasonable expectation of privacy in shared spaces." Judge Reeves inserted the USB drive into her computer. She opened the first file. I'd organized it carefully. The video showed Brandon playing video games for hours, while the timestamp showed I was at work. Ordering expensive food on my credit card. Practicing his pitch about being self-made in the mirror. Then the audio files played. Brandon's voice, clear and casual, talking to his friends. "She's still paying for everything. Why would I stop her? Once the IPO happens, I'm gone. Amelia served her purpose. Women like her think if they just support you enough, eventually you'll appreciate it. It's pathetic, honestly." Judge Reeves's eyes widened. She covered her mouth with her hand, not in shock exactly, but like she was suppressing a reaction. She clicked to another file, then another. Then she did something I'll never forget. She laughed. Not a polite courtroom chuckle. A real, genuine burst of laughter that she tried to suppress but couldn't quite manage. She looked at Brandon, then back at the screen, then at Brandon again. Her expression shifted from amusement to something colder. Mr. Mitchell, she said slowly, in 20 years on this bench, I have seen many things. Financial disputes, custody battles, property disagreements. But I have rarely, very rarely, seen such calculated, documented exploitation presented with such undeniable evidence. Brandon opened his mouth. No words came out. Judge Reeves continued, her voice steel. You systematically used your wife as a bank while claiming to the world that you needed no help. You committed fraud to obtain investments. You lied under oath on legal documents. And according to your own words, captured on these recordings, you never intended to honor any obligation to the woman who made your success possible. Your Honor, Richard tried. I'm not finished. Judge Reeves's voice could have cut glass. This court recognizes financial abuse in relationships, and we will not allow someone to profit from years of calculated exploitation. She turned to her computer and began typing her ruling. Mrs. Torres Mitchell is awarded full repayment of all documented loans in the amount of $178,342 plus 6 years of compound interest at the state rate, totaling approximately $212,000. Brandon made a choking sound. Additionally, Mrs. Torres Mitchell is awarded 40% equity in Mitchell Technologies as compensation for her role as an undisclosed founding financial contributor. You can't, Brandon started. I can and I am. Furthermore, Mr. Mitchell will pay all legal fees for both parties. And I am referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of loan fraud, securities fraud, and tax evasion. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of the judge typing. This hearing is concluded. Bailiff. Please provide copies of all evidence to the DA's office. She banged her gavel once. It was over. Richard was frantically whispering to Brandon, whose face had gone from red to white to grey. When I looked back, Veronica was gone. She'd quietly slipped out during the ruling, probably already looking for her next target. Cass put her hand on my shoulder as we stood. How do you feel? I took a deep breath. For the first time in 6 years, my chest didn't feel tight. Like I can breathe. We walked out of the courthouse into bright afternoon sunshine. My phone buzzed almost immediately. Text messages from friends who'd already seen the news. The local business reporter had been in the courtroom, and the story was already going viral. Self-made tech CEO exposed. Ex-wife provided everything. Mitchell Technologies, founder faces fraud investigation. Judge awards 40% of company to ex-wife in stunning divorce ruling. Brandon's carefully constructed story was crumbling in real time. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office. Not the cramped cubicle at my old design firm, but a real office with my name on the door. Torres Design Studio. Founded with money from the settlement and my 40% equity stake in Brandon's company, which was now legally mine. I'd hired 3 designers already. We had 6 major clients. And unlike Brandon, I paid everyone fairly and on time. On my wall was a small framed quote I'd written myself. Support people who deserve it. Document people who don't. My phone rang. It was Cass. Have you seen the news? What now? Brandon's company is being investigated by the SEC. Turns out the fraud went deeper than we knew. And Veronica is suing him for, wait for it, breach of promise. Apparently he promised to marry her and buy her a house. I laughed. Really laughed. He never learns. Nope. But hey, your 40% equity is protected regardless of what happens to him. You're insulated from his disasters now. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and thought about Brandon's words. You were just a temporary stepping stone. He was wrong. I was never a stepping stone in his path. I was the entire foundation. And when I took it back, everything he built came crashing down. But what I built on my own, that would stand forever.